Hello, everyone, and welcome to our current episode of my weekly podcast, Art is the Church of God, the Creator. And I'm talking about my music and influences on my music and my musical experiences, both as a creator of music and also as someone who is going to concerts and trying to connect my music making experience to my music going experience. I'm trying to connect my music going experience to my music making experience, and I'm trying to connect all of that to you. And in terms of my experience of the creative process, in hopes that it will help your creative process and your spiritual process as well. Because creative process and spiritual process are the same thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If someone's telling you otherwise, that's a bad faith argument. They're trying to reduce your creative process to a commodity or a drug or something that is so we don't fall for that. Okay. And I was, in the last episode, I presented two topics. It was my experience of listening to the Salome of Richard Strauss, and then I gave a brief introduction to my teacher's, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings about Dharma art and about music, and I had an extraordinary experience yesterday with music. I said when I was talking about Strauss's musical technique in Salome, I was talking about his chromatic voice leading and the way he would start with a single pitch and then move out in opposite directions by semitones from that, and how that created a scaffolding for his harmonic movements, and how that undermined chord progressions by establishing a new way of moving from chord to chord instead of through the circle of fifths. It was creating through a continuous movement of semitones moving in opposite contrary motion, and how this was related to the idea of counterpoint. But I said that his technique was really coming out of, it was a dialectical development of techniques that he got from Wagner. Strauss studied Wagner and was trying to move that further, and specifically what he was doing was building upon the harmonic language of Tristan and Isolde. And let me see if I can get my key command to work here. See if this works. I hope it doesn't. Can we see that? Tristan and Isolde? Yes, there it is. Good, we can see it on the screen. Good. Okay, good. That worked. And and Salome was not written until the 20th century. It was written around 1905, whereas Tristan and Isolde was written really 50 years before that. It was written in the 1850s. It was composed, the idea started around 1854, but the composition in earnest occupied Wagner from 1857 to 1859, and it didn't really get performed. It got its first performance, I think, 1865, but it took a very long time for people to wrap their heads around the new harmonic language of Tristan and Isolde. And in fact, the Philadelphia Orchestra, I went to Philadelphia and I heard an amazing performance of the music director, Yannick Nézet-Séguin. I'll hold up the program. Let's see if this works. Can we see hold on. Can we get this? Let me see, Control B. Does that work? All right. Doesn't work. Anyway, that's the program. It was just this yesterday, June 1st, Sunday, June 1st in Philadelphia, in Marian Anderson Concert Hall in the Kimmel Art Center in downtown Philadelphia. It was a very festive occasion. People, coincidentally, a couple blocks over, it was Philadelphia Pride, LGBTQIA plus pride, and it was a very festive atmosphere on the streets. And it was very festive inside the concert hall because we had really some of the world's greatest performers. The Philadelphia Orchestra, phenomenal. Yannick Nezis, again, great conductor. The Isolde, Nina Stemma, I think is just the best Isolde in the world today. Her voice was fantastic, and her acting, everything was just great. And the almost impossible to sing role of Tristan was performed by Stuart Skelton. He did a very manful job. He made it through, and I've heard most Tristans collapse halfway through. He didn't collapse. He made it through. And his acting was realer than real. It was devastating. So what he may have lacked in extreme volume or power, he more than made for in artistic truth. It was really very devastating and very powerful. The other performers were fine. Each one had moments of real excellence, but the real star was the orchestra and the conductor. Yannick Nezis again brought out aspects of the chromatic voice leading, the counterpoints, all the different inner layers, which I've never heard before. I've never really heard any conductor bring out the inner voice counterpoint and all of the chromatic voice leading. I mean, and as well as just this whole universe of constantly changing color. It's such an astounding work. And it perfectly expresses this emotion of endless longing and falling into this abyss of longing. And so, wow, kudos to everyone. But I just wanted to make a quick comment about the harmonic language of Tristan and Isolde, because everyone talks about the Tristan chord, the half diminished chord, which joins together the two opening gestures, da 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 da, and then da 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 da. The arc owing up representing sort of the glance, or the longing glance, and then the rising semitone phrase, which represents sort of the unattainability, right? And how these two phrases are joined together in a half diminished chord, which then irregularly resolves to a dominant seventh chord, and comes to rest on a dominant seventh, on the 5/7 chord. And this is what is truly revolutionary in the harmonic language here, because in the whole history of music, from the dawn of the common practice, from the mid-Baroque, from like the time of Corelli, from the late 1600s on, the dominant seventh, for example, in the key of C major, C, E, G, B flat, or in the key of G major, the dominant seventh would be built on, that would be C, E, G, B flat would be the dominant seventh in the key of F, right? Because that would resolve, C7 would resolve to F. The dominant seventh in common practice tonality, in the key of G major, then the dominant seventh would be built on D, D, F sharp, A, C sharp, and that would resolve out to the G major triad, right? And so in common practice tonality, the dominant seventh is the most tense chord. It is the chord which most needs resolution and which must be followed by the simplest consonants. So it's the chord of maximum dissonance, because it has two dissonant notes that, according to traditional voice leading, must resolve. It has the seventh, for example, the 5/7 of C would be built on G, G, B, D, F. So you have the seventh B, which must resolve to the C in the triad, and it has the fourth, which must resolve downwards to the third degree of the C major triad. So you have the B has to resolve to the 1 degree, the C of the C major triad, and the F, the 4th degree, has to resolve downward to the 3rd degree of the and then G is the common tone, so G doesn't have to change. So we have a sense of symmetry there. We have we have contrary motion. We have rising motion, semitone, B rising to C, and then we have F descending to E, and then we have G remaining as the center, as a kind of, you can think of that as a kind of a center or an axis of symmetry. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about axial symmetry and contrary motion in relation to as a prime determinant of how we perceive beauty. This is what we were talking about. But the revolutionary impact of harmony in Tristan, in Wagner's Tristan, is that the predominant is the half diminished seventh, and it comes to rest on the dominant. So the dominant is not the dissonance, the dominant is the new consonant, it is the new chord of rest. And there is not a conventional resolution of dominant to tonic until the final opera. So for 5 hours, we have a suspension of normal tonality. We do not come to rest on the chord of rest is not the tonic, but we have a chord of temporary rest on the dominants. We keep just building dominant to dominant to dominant to dominant to dominant until eventually we get the tonic at the very end. It finally resolves in B major. And it's quite astounding when it does, and it's very beautifully orchestrated. And Wagner also uses his mastery of orchestration to communicate the intense feeling of that release, of that great catharsis. What I want to say about it is that my experience of this, and this is just my listening, I didn't speak with Yannick Nézet-Séguin or the conductor or the musicians. This is just my experience of studying the score and listening to it and having had a very powerful performance experience yesterday, is that I really think that what Wagner was getting at in this resolution of the so-called Tristan chord of the half diminished seventh to the dominant seventh was that by presenting the dominant seventh as the chord of rest, I think he is moving away from the tense dominant seventh of common practice tonality to which is based upon a 5-limit sound universe where we only have overtones that come out of octaves of the tonic, which is the one, the first partial, right, and then the third and the fifth, the third overtone and the fifth overtone. So if you just take the fundamental in the key of C, that would be C. If you take the third overtone, the first two are the C and the octave C. If you take the 1, 2, the third overtone is G, would be the 5th degree of the scale, and the 4th overtone again is an octave reinforcement of the fundamental. It's giving you that sense of this. That's why it's the tonic indicating chord, because the fundamental is repeated, and then the 5th overtone is the major third, and that would give you the C major chord by going for the first 5 or 6 overtones. It would just outline that would be the tonic indicating chord, right? So because since the dawn of the Baroque, the transition to using major and minor triads actually occurred earlier, actually occurred in the Renaissance. The transition from medieval to Renaissance music is that medieval music is characterized by open fifths, and Renaissance music is characterized by major chords and minor chords, three components, not just 2 notes, but 3-note chords. And that's what we think of as being a complete chord. Since the 1400s, since the dawn of the Renaissance, we expect there to be not just the da, 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 not just the first and 5th degree, but we expect there to be da, a middle note there to complete the chord, to give it the quality of being major or da minor, giving it the major or the minor quality. We expect not simply a tonic sonority, but also a major or minor quality to go along with it. since the dawn of Renaissance aesthetics in the 1400s. And there was another huge change in musical aesthetics in the Baroque from about 1600 onwards in terms of the idea of passing tones occurring on the strong beat or the weak beat. In the Renaissance, the passing tones only occurred on weak beats, but in Baroque music, we hear passing tones on strong beats, and that's called an appoggiatura, and that creates a very strong emotional sense of like accented dissonance, wanting to strongly have a stronger sense of resolution. And this is what Wagner exploits by making his first gesture of Tristan and appoggiatura, da da. There's the downbeat, the upbeat is so the first strong beat is a leap up of a major six, which has to resolve inwards to the fifth, right? And but by coming to rest on what we perceive of as a dominant seventh chord, which in normal practice is dissonant, he redefines it. And this is what I mean by the redefinition of the dominant seventh, is that in a 5-limit universe, which is the limit of just intonation tuning, which is the universe of pre-equal tempered music, which is the universe of medieval and Renaissance, and especially of early Baroque music, the dominant seventh only occurs fairly high up in the overtone series. For example, the lowest, closest to the tonic dominant seventh that you could, 5/7 chord that you could create out of a single fundamental would, in one octave, would be a D major seventh. That would be the D from overtone 36, the F sharp, overtone 45, A, overtone 54, and then the C, the seventh degree, C natural at the top would be overtone 64. So that's going from, in a 5-limit tuning, that's going from 36 to 64, 36, 45, 54, 64 would outline sort of a D7th, which would be the 5/7 in the key of G, right? But the stable lower, the lower you go down the overtone series, the closer you get to a sense of a root tonic indicating chord. So the archetypal tonic indicating chord is, for example, again coming from choosing arbitrarily a root of C. If that was our tonic, if that was our fundamental, then the C major triad would be 4, 5, 6. 4, 5, 6. So like 1, 2, 3, octave, octave, fifth, and then 4, 5, 6, the major triad. In the, like for example, in a fundamental of C, C, E, G. Now that is if that's a 5-limit. But if you extend your numerical universe one more prime number to 7, because that's the sequence of prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7. Of course, we're using multiples of 2 to create octaves, right? So that's what allows us to talk about not just 2 but 4, 8, and so on, right? If we go from 4 and we include a 7 limit, then that gives us very low down, close to the fundamental. We have 4, 5, 6, 7. So each of those adjacencies in the lowest part of the overtone series creates a fundamental tonic indicating sonority. So tonic indicating sonorities include 1, 2, which are the octave. Obviously 1, 1 is the unison. 1, 2, the octave. 1, 2, 3, which is the octave and the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, including the higher octave. So octave, like fundamental, octave, fifth, higher octave, and then 4, 5, and 6. The first, third, and fifth degrees of the major chord. But if we go one further to 7, if we include 7 in our sonic universe, if we talk about not merely a 5-limit but a 7-limit sonic universe, then we have 4, 5, 6, 7, and that would spell the basic blues chord of C, C, E, G, B flat, very flat, B flat. And that is analogous to this stable dominant seventh. Dominant seventh converted from a functional dissonance into a functional consonance. And this is exactly what Wagner does in Tristan. He establishes what we would think of normally contextually as the dominant seventh chord. He recontextualizes it as an alternative tonic sonority, as a chord of rest, by preceding it with a more dissonant chord, which is the half diminished seventh, which has tritone and other elements which are more unstable, which need further resolution. So he retrains our ears. Wagner in Tristan and Isolde retrains our ears to hear the dominant seventh, normally a dissonant chord, into an alternate kind of tonic as a new type of plateau, which contains more tension than a regular 4-5-6 tonic, because it has that seventh overtone in it, but still is basically a point of repose, and which ultimately does not resolve purely into the simpler 4-5-6 tonic until the very end of the opera, and finally resolves into B major at the end. So I believe that in addition to liberating chromatic counterpoint and revolutionizing orchestration and all these other things that people have talked about in Wagner, I think that a previously unexamined aspect of Wagner's achievement in Tristan and Isolde is that I believe it inaugurates in Western art music a 7-limit conception of beauty, a 7-limit conception of sonic perception, which has already existed for centuries in other and non-Western cultures. It is the sort of paradigmatic tuning of African derived, what we call blues scales, which all derive from African pitch practice. And so for me, that 4-5-6-7 C, E, G, B, very B flat, to me that is the tonic blues chord, because in blues you can play, just like in Wagner, you can have the dominant seventh as a chord of rest on the strong beat, and it doesn't need a resolution. You can end right there, and of course what the great genius of, we talked about Charlie Parker and the revolution of bebop. He extended the idea of the seventh as a chord of rest to every chord, so that every chord in bebop has an added tone of a dominant seventh, and it's essentially a 4-voiced harmony where there's always tonic, third, fifth, and seventh are constantly interacting in a four-part counterpoint. And that's what's so extraordinary in the amazing, infinitely chromatic modulation world of Charlie Parker and the geniuses, the great revolutionaries of bebop, of modern jazz of the 1940s. I mean, of course, in other words, they took the sort of the fundamental blues element, but they moved it to every degree of the scale. So you hear it not just on the 1, the 4, and the 5, but you hear it on 12 degrees of the scale. And in traditional blues, you'd hear the 7th on the 1, the 5, the 4, 3 degrees of the scale. But in Charlie Parker's and the sophisticated practice of bebop, it's 12 chromatic degrees of the scale are augmented and added to, but with additional scale degrees, which makes it so brilliant, so fantastic. And I think that it doesn't evolve necessarily directly out of Wagner, although indirectly it becomes a secondary stream. I think it evolves directly from the blues, but then, of course, Wagner's practice influenced the next generation of musicians. We said, Debussy, Strauss, and then, and of course Mahler, and then After that, Scriabin, and then from the Impressionists, and we talked about the influence on Bartok, and so from and Stravinsky. And then from Bartok and Stravinsky, then there is a secondary stream that goes directly into the genius of Charlie Parker, because he was listening to Stravinsky and Bartok and Hindemith and Alban Berg as well. So he was fully aware of how post-Wagnerian innovations in harmonic language, and he combined that with his pre-existent jazz and blues training and discipline, and created the modern art music, which is bebop. So that's what I wanted to say about this. I mentioned this a little bit last time about some of my teachers at the Naropa Institute in Boulder under the directorship of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And so I just wanted to repeat a couple of comments about the music program there. As I said, I was the first person to get an accredited music degree from Naropa back in, was it 1987? Studied world music and jazz under many great teachers, but the program was, the Naropa's program in world music and jazz was founded by Jerry Granelli, the very shout out to Jerry, and Bill Douglas, both of whom are great, and I venerate them forever. And I just wanted to repeat the comments that Trungpa made to the artistic faculty of the Naropa Institute in 1982. In a meeting in 1982 with the Naropa Institute Arts faculty, the Vidyadhara, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, referred to artistic practice as ongoing and all-pervasive, involving every aspect of one's life. All right, so we don't draw any distinction between our artistic creative process, whether it is actively creating or passively receiving great artworks. We do not separate that out from our spiritual life or our sexual life or any other aspect of our life whatsoever. We don't. It's inseparable from politics. It's inseparable from eating, sleeping, working, every aspect of our lives. For example, he says, for instance, if you are a musician, you are always a musician, not just while you are playing your instrument. Again, I'm going to repeat these words of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. If you are a musician, you are always a musician, not just while you are playing your instrument. You hear music in the way your knife clinks in a restaurant, the way the car door closes, the way somebody sneezes. Refining your ability to truly hear is the ground of musical expression, and developing a more sophisticated awareness and appreciation of sound and silence is a 24-hour practice. Okay, these are words of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I want to repeat that last phrase so that we really memorize it. Refining your ability to truly hear is the ground of musical expression, and developing a more sophisticated awareness and appreciation of sound and silence is a 24-hour practice. 24-hour, meaning we're doing it when we're asleep. We do it when we're awake. It's all pervading. It's everywhere. So what we're trying to do in these talks and in the music that's accompanying it, which is by me, of course, is that I am I'm trying for myself to develop more sophisticated awareness and appreciation of sound and silence in myself, and it is my goal in these pieces that by listening, that you will develop a more sophisticated awareness and appreciation of sound and silence. This is what we're trying to do, trying to move forward this idea of Dharma art. And once again, the motto of the Naropa Institute was Prajna Garbha, womb of wisdom. When we are developing our sense perceptions, and we are developing our listening and our awareness. We are in that womb of wisdom. We are, in this place where wisdom is developing. It's not just fun or, whatever, having a good time. It's about developing wisdom, the wisdom of sense perceptions, of coming to see what sense perceptions really are, which is not entertainment, but our essential equipment for survival and relating to the rest of the universe. Our sense perceptions are what connect us as human beings to the world, to the cosmos, to the infinity of all information, which in theological language, of course, is God. And we're not afraid to use theological language. We won't be intimidated by people who misuse theological language, which is just about everyone, because people like to throw words around without knowing what they mean, because they're trying to gather power. But we're not doing this for gathering power. We're doing this to speak the truth which is shouted down. All I'm doing in these podcasts is that I'm sharing what I know is true and what you know is true, which is that art is a revelation of God through the senses, and that art is the church of God, the Creator. This is what we mean when we say the Creator. We are talking about our sense perceptions. And within our sense perceptions, sound. There's sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And if we just focus on one of those five, on sound, then we understand the truth that music is a revelation through sound. Music is a revelation of God through sound. Every musician knows this. We're afraid to say it because it's going to make traditionally religious people angry. But we don't care about that. What we care about is the truth. Okay, let's get back to my introduction to the Dharma art teachings of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and trying to relate this to our experience of listening to Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. Okay, so where we left off was the founding of Naropa in the 1970s, and but Chogyam Trungpa, although he died at a tragically young age, he still lived into the mid-latter 1980s. So let's continue with his artistic training, his artistic work, his artistic path. And as I said, he was not primarily a musician. He was primarily trained as a poet, of course, as a speaker, as a Dharma teacher, but his artistic practice was poetics primarily, secondarily in painting. He was a talented Thangka painter, and then maybe on a third level he had training in the traditional performing arts of Tibet, the dance and movement and stuff like that, which informed his sensibility of theater and dance. And so visual art, a calligrapher, a gifted calligrapher, so a visual artist as well. And he developed interest in, as we said, in filmmaking and photography and so on. So he was an avid visual artist. And he created flower arrangements as a sense of visual art, as a type of organic sculpture. So you can say that his visual art included not only two-dimensional, like calligraphy, but also three-dimensional art, sculpture, in the form of very, very beautiful flower arrangements and other arrangements of objects. Yes. Okay, so in North America in the late 70s and 80s, throughout, we said that Chogyam Trungpa he came to North America in 1970 after having, born and raised in Tibet, and then Tibet was occupied by China and is now a part of China, and then he lived in India and England, and then he came to North America in 1970. He lived there until 1987. Throughout his 17 years of teaching in North America, the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche actively pursued his artistic disciplines and followed his far-ranging interests with immense inquisitiveness and delight. In the late 70s and early 80s, he gave a number of seminars on Dharma art, focusing on different aspects of the connection between meditation and artistic creativity, such as art and sanity, visual Dharma, or art in everyday life. The Dharma art seminars conducted at the Naropa Institute and elsewhere were a rich mix of lectures, discussions, meditation practice, art exhibits and demonstrations, and spontaneous compositions of calligraphy, poetry, and flower arrangement. And this is what I'm doing in this podcast. I'm trying to bring back to life the Dharma art seminars that my teacher gave, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, in the late 70s and the early 80s. I have the transcripts, and I will, read parts of the transcripts, and I will add my own commentary to them. Because to me, this is what must be kept alive. As far as I'm concerned, I learned a lot of great stuff from him, but this is the single greatest thing that I learned from him. And this is what I most want to communicate to you, if I can, to the best extent that I possibly can. So, they give students a simple exercise, intuitive exercise, embodying the principles underlying Dharma art. The Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche introduced the practice of object arranging. In this practice, students work with the Dharma art teachings through the practice of mindful placement of 3 small objects on a sheet of white paper. In this practice, the white paper represents the openness and clarity of space, and the objects represent form. As they place the objects one at a time onto the sheet of paper, students explore the subtle interconnection of space and form, and the principles of heaven, earth, and human. By paying close attention to how each object is handled and placed in the practice itself, students begin to develop more grace and dignity in the way they handle their environment altogether. Now, that practice of space arrangement was placing objects on a white sheet. How is that analogous to musical practice? Okay, well, in musical practice, the white sheet, that openness, that's silence. That is the background of all sound. And each object is a specific, discrete sound that has a beginning, a middle, and end, that has boundaries, that has a shape. And what we're doing in music is that we are placing specific sounds that have a beginning, middle, and end, and are surrounded by silence, right? And it is the context of the interplay of the object, the sound object, and the surrounding silence, which, by paying close attention to how each sound object is handled and placed in silence, students begin to develop more grace and dignity in the way they handle their environment altogether. So by placing sounds in silence, we learn how to relate to ourselves in the universe altogether. That's the key idea. And it's not just an analogy, it's a direct experience. When we take control and when we consciously place sound objects in the context of silence, we develop grace and dignity, and we handle our entire environment where we are in the universe altogether. And we can say that, and it's true, and it's not a messiah trip, it's not megalomania, it's not egomania, it's just true. Okay. Now, so going back to the plastic arts and the visual arts, the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's interest in the arts was flourishing, and he presented a series of flower arranging exhibits, environmental installations, and art exhibits. In gathering materials for his installations, he worked with the principle of inherent richness, called yun in Tibetan. He trained his students to recognize this quality of richness and power, whether they were selecting fine art or choosing a tie, and to appreciate the discipline of paying attention to detail Now, in music, what is the discipline of paying attention to music, paying attention to detail? What we're paying attention to are what gives a sense of richness and power. To say we have to recognize this quality, this quality of richness and power in sound. So what gives a sound richness and power? For example, right now we might be listening to the low bass frequencies, or we might be listening to a specific overtone, and it's fading in, it's fading out against the background of silence, and that's what gives it. The chords of Richard Wagner's Tristan have richness and power. The half diminished seventh, the Tristan chord, has richness and power, and the way it resolves in a totally unpredictable or non-traditional way to the dominant seventh chord, which now we've understood is really a recontextualized seven limit tonic, has tremendous richness and power. And that whole process against the finite objects of sounds that begin and end against the background of silence is what gives music its richness and power, and we have to learn to appreciate the discipline of paying attention to detail. That's why in the concert hall we have to pay attention, and we must maintain complete silence, because silence is the container for those sounds that have that quality of richness and power. And again, it's not an ego trip. It's not that the musicians are demanding or shutting you up. They're demanding that you be silent. It's that in order for you to develop the correct attention to hear what's going on in great music, the background of the sound object is silence. You must maintain silence. And what brings it to life is attention, whether we are paying attention to visual art in a gallery or paying attention in silence to sound art in a concert hall. Attention and silence and dignity, keeping our posture and staying awake. Yes, very hard. Over a 5-hour opera, it's almost impossible to stay completely at attention and completely awake and silent for that long. So it's a discipline. But it's a discipline worth cultivating. And all civilized people owe it to themselves. And it's not snobism. It's about having respect for yourself. By maintaining attention, by maintaining silence, by maintaining posture, you are honoring yourself. By keeping your attention focused, you keep your honor clean, really. The Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche himself paid meticulous attention to every detail of his environmental installations. He would go to the flower markets before dawn to pick out the freshest, choicest flowers for his arrangements. He also had the uncanny ability to magnetize people to loan their priceless heirlooms for the installations. Once he came across an 8-foot statue of the ancient Chinese sovereign Yongle that he very much wanted to use in his exhibit. The statue was extremely valuable, and at first the owner was reluctant to part with it. But upon hearing of the Vidyadhara's deep connection with the Yongle lineage of China, he agreed to loan it free of charge. To help with his artwork, the Vidyadhara founded a group called Explorers of the Richness of the Phenomenal World. And that's a great phrase, Explorers of the Richness of the Phenomenal World. Let's just say we are explorers of the richness of the phenomenal world. Repeat after me. I am an explorer of the richness of the phenomenal world. And with this group, Explorers of the Richness of the Phenomenal World, with whom he worked closely to assist in his exhibits and installations, particularly in gathering materials for large flower arrangements. He also founded a school of flower arranging called Kalapa Ikebana, and we love flowers. I'm not a gifted flower arranger, but I love shopping for flowers and choosing the most beautiful flowers and bringing them home and doing the little things that I can with them. I'm sure you do too, right? So just extending that to the level of real installation art, right? The Vidyadhara also continued to pursue photography and encouraged the development of a photographic society called Mixam by his Vajrayesan Ursel Tenzin, who was also an avid photographer and who was also a very important teacher to me as well. Very, very important, very great teacher, American-born. In the late 70s, the Vidyadhara Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche also encouraged the development of a for-profit film company called Center Productions in Boulder, Colorado. Through Center Productions, he worked on both the direction and part of actual filming of Discovering Elegance, a film documenting the Vidyadhara and others in the process of setting up an elaborate environmental installation. I believe it's on YouTube, so maybe I'll try to post a link to it on my YouTube site, Discovering Elegance. So I'll try to find a link and I'll try to post that on this site. And in early meetings with the Center production staff, the Vidyadhara discussed principles of Dharma art as they applied to filmmaking. Later, the Vidyadhara worked with Center Productions on a film about the life of Karmapa called The Lion's Roar. So look for those online, the Vimeo. Again, if I find the links, I'll post them. Discovering Elegance and the What's Left of The Lion's Roar. The Vidyadhara practiced calligraphy on a regular basis. Calligraphy, ink and brush penmanship. Practiced calligraphy on a regular basis and created numerous calligraphies, primarily for his meditation centers and as gifts for students and friends. I've tried to keep this sense of calligraphy going with my logos and stuff like that. I've tried to, in my own modest way. So like the Mu logo is essentially a calligraphy stroke. Perhaps you recognize that, just sort of going up, going down, and sort of making a stylized kind of sine wave pattern, So, I do my best. And but I don't claim to be, I'm not a gifted visual artist. The visual elements you see in these videos are amateur. I do the best I can, and I work with friends and try to make them as beautiful as we can, but I'm not pretending to be a great visual artist. I'm simply trying to find a visual analog to help you focus on the music, which is my primary concern. And but it's also very helpful. That's also something that Wagner realized, that it was not enough to create this fantastic symphonic music by adding words and stage action and stage scenery and a story. He makes it deeper and more real. The sound of the human voice, the gestures of the performers, the costumes, all of that create what he called a Gesamtkunstwerk, a total artwork. And that vision of unifying all the arts is also, that's central to what I talked about, Western art religion or Kunstreligion, right, of Wagner. And this is also central to the artistic practice of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. They're in some ways, very similar figures, working in different fields, of course. All right. At the time of the taking of the refuge vow, and again, the time of the taking the Bodhisattva vow, students would each receive an original calligraphy of their Dharma name. As a personal anecdote, I took refuge with Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and I received a calligraphy with my Dharma name, which he made for me, and it's a treasure. It's a personal treasure for my life. Occasionally, Trungpa Rinpoche would donate calligraphies to be used in fundraising auctions or use them to illustrate points in his Dharma art seminars. He welcomed students to observe him as he created calligraphies so the students could observe the process as well as the final result. In his calligraphy, the Vidyadhara worked with Japanese brushes rather than pens, often combining Japanese brush and ink technique with Tibetan language forms. Such a fusion of forms and methods from different cultures, primarily Tibet, China, Japan, India, England, and North America, characterized his style. And now, my teacher Trungpa Rinpoche received a lot of criticism by mixing together, for example, Western and Eastern approaches, English with Japanese, with Tibetan, and so on, Chinese, and he just disregarded that and created his own work. So, yes, when you combine things of different cultures, you are open to a lot of criticism. People think you're flaky, that you're making like a personal sort of a cafeteria mixture of this and that, and you're diluting the purity of the original tradition. There's some validity to all of those criticisms, but getting at a deeper synthesis of universality is more important than those petty. So we're going to acknowledge the validity of these smaller arguments, but we're going to focus on the big argument, which is that we are trying to synthesize Eastern and Western ideas here to achieve a real, more valuable synthesis for our time, for our world, for the 21st century and beyond, to heal ourselves and to heal our deeply wounded world, to heal our deeply wounded selves in our deeply wounded world. We must go beyond petty concerns of taste, and we must be fearless, and we must be willing to achieve a genuine fusion of forms and methods from different cultures. And my teachers did that. I am trying to do that, and we all have to do that. Okay. Poetry was a regular and ongoing aspect of the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's daily life. Most often, he would create spoken poetry spontaneously in informal, small group settings. He seldom wrote his poems down. Instead, students would transcribe his poetry as he recited it. So for him, poetry was a sound art. It was a spoken art form. He didn't fuss with words on the page. What mattered was the sound of the words coming out. And he, obviously, his native language was Tibetan, and English was an adopted language that he learned as an adult. So he was a very gifted poet, but he obviously didn't have the total fluency as a native speaker. Yeah. And so his English language poetry is actually very valuable and very beautiful, but we have to understand it within the context in which it was created. Yeah. And he often invited his students to participate as well, contributing whole spontaneous poems or individual lines of group poems. In meetings with the Naropa writing faculty, the Vidyadhara introduced a number of traditional Tibetan writing exercises. He encouraged the tradition of spontaneous recitation and the experience of being on the spot with the support of a written text to follow. And I experienced this teaching, and it was also manifested in that of my writing teachers at Naropa, including the very great Anne Waldman, who is still with us, and some other teachers who are no longer with us, such as the very great Allen Ginsberg, and so on, and many, many others who were part of the Naropa writing community in the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics, where I studied, and where I maintain connections to this day. And I still remain very active in maintaining that tradition of contemplative poetics, which emerged out of the original beatnik culture. Yeah, the so-called beat poetics, right? That was the second generation of beat poetics, was Dharma poetics, yes. And so, the Vidyadhara Trungpa Rinpoche took a great interest in Western music and was especially fond of Mozart and Beethoven. But his musical interests were wide-ranging and included the music of China, Japan, India, and Indonesia as well. He wrote a number of songs and often at the end of programs joined his students in singing sessions. He worked closely with one of his students, Robert Murchison, in designing and building a large traditional Tibetan drum. Okay, so of course that's important. Although he was not a musician, he took a great interest in Western music. He was especially fond of Mozart and Beethoven. And the interest in non-Western music, in jazz, obviously the jazz faculty, in African and world music. This was also an important part of my musical training at Naropa. And for example, we studied Indian music with John Bergamo and Indonesian gamelan, and I studied gamelan first at Oberlin and then at Naropa. And at Naropa, I joined a Naropa group, and we were the first group. We went to Bali and we purchased a gamelan, and we learned the gamelan, and we studied with the gamelan masters of Bali, Indonesia, of the National Conservatory in Ubud, and we brought the gamelan back and continued that program of the Naropa gamelan, which still continues to this day, and is still a part of my music practice. So if you hear gamelan influence in my music, that's where it started, yes. And In 1980, the Vidyadhara Shogun Rinpoche began his association and friendship with Kanjuro Shibata Sensei, the 12th generation bow maker. This is Onyumishi of the Emperor of Japan. Through Shibata Sensei, the Vidyadhara introduced Kyudo, or Japanese archery, to his students, and through Mrs. Kiyoko Shibata, the art of Japanese tea ceremony as well. So this is not directly, it's more of an athletic practice than an artistic practice, but I gained a lot from doing fundamental exercises of Japanese archery, and definitely from the Japanese tea ceremony. You really should find a group of people who do traditional Japanese tea and have a tea ceremony. When you experience conscious tea drinking in the tea ceremony, it will changes your whole relationship to eating and drinking, and it's a very great thing. And it really, you understand the essence of gustatory art and olfactory art, not about filling your belly, but about experiencing pure perception without subject and object, with attention and with discipline. Yeah. With Shibata Sensei, he formed the Ryuko Kyudo-jo group, originally Javala Sara, in the early 80s. The Vidyadhara also formed Kalapacha, a society for the study and practice for the way of tea. And there was also, I remember in Boulder, a fragrance group, a group that worked with the contemplative experience of fragrance. Because the five senses are co-equal, sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. As a musician, I focus on sound, but there's just as much artistry in the artistry of taste, the great, chefs, the artistry of scent of the great, perfumers and great makers of incense, the experience of touch, the great workers with textiles and, and of course the visual arts, right? Another expression of the Vidyadhara's artistry was the development of a series of holidays and festivals for his students, the Shambhala community. In effect, he was working with his students to create the components of an entire culture based on Dharma art, integrating the arts, business, government, military, education, religion, and family life. Okay, now this is the analogy I want to get to Wagner. He was working, Trungpa Rinpoche was working with his students to create the components of an entire culture based on Dharma art, starting with art, but integrating all of the arts, business, government, military, education, religion, and family life. It was an all-encompassing vision. And this is Wagner's vision. He started with music, and he expanded from music to include theater, visual art, all of the things involved in opera production. And then he went out from opera to create a community in the Bayreuth Festival, which is connected to business and the whole political life, and for better or for worse, his vision included military, religion, family life, government, all of that. There were no boundaries in his vision of art. And a lot of his vision was misguided and bigoted and anti-Semitic, but the point is that he had the all-encompassing vision. And just because his vision made errors and also went off in negative and counterproductive ways doesn't mean that the basic impulse itself should be flushed down the toilet. All right, because this is what we've done in the 20th and 21st century. We're saying, oh, I just like the music, but I don't like the total vision. But it's part of the total vision. You can't separate it out, even if other people abused it and did evil things with it. All right? We have to be aware of the evil, but we have to always preserve the good. And the good is not just one thing. It's all-encompassing. Yes. All right? You can understand Wagner's total vision and not sign on to being a Nazi or a white supremacist or a bigot or an anti-Semite. And you can sign on to the Vidyadhara's vision of the Shambhala community without endorsing the inevitable abuses of power that occurred within that. All right. Yes, you can. It takes courage and it takes humility. All right. In designing the Midsummer's Day Festival in particular, he tried to impart some of the pageantry and ritual splendor of traditional Tibetan folk festivals with parades, banners, dancing, music theater, and sporting events. Midsummer Day is coming up soon, June 21st, so the summer solstice, let's get into it, Let us approach the Midsummer Day with joy, and let us try to create our own version of a traditional folk festival with parades, banners, dancing, theater, music, and sporting events. This was definitely what I experienced when I stepped out of Tristan and Isolde in the Kimmel Art Center in Philadelphia yesterday, and then we went right into what was still the ongoing festivities of the Philadelphia Pride, amazing, joyful street festival. And it was great. It was of the people. It was working class. It was street. It was ghetto in the best possible way. I mean that as a term of praise, and meaning authentic and real and energetic and, completely proud and present. It was wonderful, yes, without any pretension whatsoever. It was just beautiful to see people socializing in that way, yeah, and incorporating their sexuality into their social without separating it. It was very beautiful, actually, yeah. We need more public displays like that, and it's not destructive. Of course, if it gets too wild, you need to rein it in, and thank God for the police. But there's a lot of sort of rough edges of wildness that we can tolerate, which are not dangerous, which are actually productive. We need to have more of that wildness, not just in the concert hall. We need it in the concert hall, but we need it outside of the concert hall as well. The Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche carried his artistry into his home, an idea very much stressed in his Dharma art teachings. He took an interest in all the details of his household, including architectural and interior design, landscape design, furniture arrangements, cooking, cleaning, forms of etiquette, dress, and service. So, he was very much a perfectionist, and that can drive other people crazy, I mean, everyone, claims to hate a perfectionist, but, it's the perfectionists who achieve great things. Wagner was a perfectionist. He worked on Tristan for years and years. He wouldn't just crank it out like an opera, like other opera composers who write an opera in 2 or 3 weeks. He would work on it for 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 decades, and he had to work on it obsessively until it was perfect. And to whatever modest extent that I try to be equally a perfectionist with my sound art productions, with my music, my compositions. Let's finish our introduction to Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's Dharma art practice. Joining Heaven and Earth. Joining Heaven Earth was a visual Dharma art seminar given by Trungpa Rinpoche, the Vidyadhara, in Boulder, Colorado in July of 1979. During his talks in this highly interactive seminar, Trungpa Rinpoche executed a series of spontaneous calligraphies and illustrations on transparencies, which were displayed in the process of their creation by an overhead projector. The calligraphies, the Vidyadhara usually visually demonstrated the principles of heaven, earth, and the human that he was discussing. Following his example, I've also practiced ink and brush calligraphy, and as I said, I've tried to keep its basic feeling going in my logos and also in my visual art. I think of it as a type of digital calligraphy. According to Trungpa, heaven signifies non-thought or vision. It is basic space, like an empty canvas, inviting but a bit scary. And that empty canvas of music, that's the black background of the oscilloscope, but it's also silence. It's the silence in which sound occurs, right? Earth represents first thought, your initial inspiration. Human signifies the act of actually expressing something. So, heaven, earth, human, space, silence, right? Earth, first thought, inspiration. Human, actual emotion. Us, our lives, who we are. The threefold principle of heaven, earth, and human is found in many Asian cultures. and it applies to an artist's point of view as well as the audience's point of view. In fact, the same paradigm is useful in many other aspects of life as well, from such simple activities as cooking a meal to running an organization or designing a city. In addition to calligraphies that Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche created during the seminar, he also drew a series of illustrations on the glass sheets of the overhead projector. He created many of these in a series of layers, building from simple sketches to diagrams of greater complexity as he went along. In a series of 20 diagrams, the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche symbolically expressed the interrelationship of the principles of heaven, earth, and human with the Vajrayana concept of the four karmas, or the four enlightened activities. The Vajrayana is Tibetan Buddhism. The four karmas, four activities: pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and destroying. Pacifying, the lowest energy level; enriching, higher energy; magnetizing, and then destroying, bringing back down to the highest level. And in music, we hear pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and destroying in harmony and counterpoint and in performance. There are sounds we experience as pacifying sounds, the low overtone tonic sounds, the sounds closest to the fundamental. And then we hear sounds which are enriching sounds, going beyond those first few overtones, perhaps to, as Wagner is suggesting, the 7 limit, to getting to that rich, enriched chord of the 7th chord, the dominant 7th chord, or the enriched tonic chord, the tonic 7th chord, right? Magnetizing, going out from there, creating like voice leading in music and drawing the audience in, that voice leading counterpoint, and destroying what happens after there is a great climax of music, and then returning and building again. So pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and destroying, the four karmas. We'll come back again to us. What are the four karmas of music? Right. What are the heaven, earth, and human aspects of music making? Yes. Beginning in 1976, and in the period leading up to this seminar, Trungpa Rinpoche had begun focusing more and more on the teachings of Shambhala, a tradition historically closely aligned with Buddhism, but of more secular and societal focus. However, for students steeped in his earlier teachings on the view and the practice of Vajrayana Buddhism, the relationship between Shambhala and Vajrayana was not always clear, although both streams of teaching were deeply rooted in mindfulness practice. Of course, mindfulness is what we maintain when we listen to great music, right? In this seminar, Vidyadhara Trungpa Rinpoche seamlessly interwove these two streams. In the discussions following each talk, audience members were called upon to compose spontaneous oral poetry, creating 3-line poems on the spot based on heaven, earth, and human principles he had introduced. In extended interchanges, Trungpa drew out shyer students, gently coaxing them to speak their lines with confidence and clarity, yet he did not hesitate to interrupt those who spoke glibly and were unwilling to stay with the more genuine rawness of the present moment and experience. When the student poets lost the quality of spontaneity and began to fall back on more conventional, figuring out something clever to say approach, Vidyadhara would ask them to go more quickly. He encouraged them to cut their hesitation and speak simply and directly. Trungpa referred to this quality of spontaneous expression as first thought, best thought. And this is just a sort of a basic proverb or mantra of Dharma art, so let's repeat it, everyone. First thought, best thought. Let's say it again, everyone. First thought, best thought. Among the participants in the 1979 seminar was the poet Allen Ginsberg, who came up with this poem. 3 lines. So first line, heart beating in my chest, banner shining in electric light, everybody listening. The 3 lines again. First line, heart beating in my chest. Second line, banner shining in electric light. 3, everybody listening. David Rome, Trungpa's personal secretary, his personal secretary offering was, again, 3 lines. Seeing comes before looking, in spite of the words, and the end is the beginning. Another important facet of the 1979 seminar on joining heaven and earth is that here, The process of perception was once again explored, but from a slightly different perspective than Chogyam Trungpa had previously presented in his 1978 Visual Dharma seminar at Naropa Institute. In 1978, the Vidyadhara described perception as a process of first seeing and then looking and seeing again. He described seeing as creating a kind of open ground, as looking as beginning to examine the phenomenal world further. In 1979, the Vidyadhara reversed the order, saying that first you look and then you see. Here he connected looking with inquisitiveness and with prajna, or intellect, and seeing with jnana, or wisdom. So prajna, intellect, then leading to jnana, wisdom. Interesting, right? It seems that sometimes perception proceeds from a flash of openness to an interest in the particulars. And at other times, an interest in the particulars draws us in the direction of openness. And this is always going on in music. We're listening to the total sound of the orchestra, and then our ears just zoom in, you just fall into it, and you hear the oboe, Or we are listening to a solo. We're listening to, the English horn solo in Act 3, and then it gradually comes out to the whole orchestra, all right? So same thing in music. And the discussion of creativity, meditation, perception, and the intriguing connections between Dharma art and the teachings of Vajrayana Buddhism and Shambhala is open-ended and ongoing. There are many subtleties in the Dharma art teaching and continually evolving views as to its meaning, significance, and application. However, working with this material is not merely a theoretical or philosophical concern, but strikes to the heart of how we perceive our world and how we choose to live in it. Working with this material is not merely a theoretical or philosophical concern, but strikes to the heart of how we perceive our world and how we choose to live in it. At each moment, we have a choice. We can act with mindlessness, tightness, and aggression, or with gentleness, humor, and openness. Rather than viewing art as merely a form of entertainment or pretty bauble, the Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche saw the potential of artistic creation to directly point to what is true and to bring both the artist and the observer into the richness and limitless potential of the present moment of experience or nowness. In that experience, aggression is overcome and transformation is possible. Let's say that again. Is that there is the potential of artistic creation to directly point to what is true and to bring both the artist and the observer into the richness and limitless potential of the present moment of experience or nowness. In that experience, aggression is overcome and transformation is possible. It could be said that in his many teaching activities, Trungpa Rinpoche was always at heart an artist. For many of his students, the essence of what they learned was transmitted through gesture, environment, and artistic creativity. Vidyadhara's inquisitiveness and love of the great variety of artistic expressions and his respect for the power of art to awaken and liberate were unbounded. For that reason, he emphasized the teachings of Dharma art for all of his students, artists and non-artists alike. May this important stream of teachings awaken our appreciation for the richness of this colorful and challenging world, and in turn may it rouse our compassion to awaken such appreciation in others. This has been an episode of me, Greg Muna, aka Master Mu, reminding everyone the truth that art is the church of God, the Creator.